Hey guys! Tonight we're sinking into the velvet-draped, candle-flickering world of Victorian ghost hunters. A sleep-deprived bunch armed with notepads, nervous glances, and an unshakable belief that the dearly departed might drop by for tea. It's 1882, the fog is thick, and the gas lamps cast long, suspicious shadows on cobblestone streets. You've been invited to your very first séance in London's genteel Bloomsbury district. The hostess is Madame Petunia Whitbread, renowned medium, alleged telepath, and part-time jam maker. The house smells faintly of lavender, coal smoke, and whatever was boiled for lunch 3 hours too long. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last a day in Victorian England. The corsets pinch, the tea is overboiled, and ghost hunting is a surprisingly demanding hobby that eats up your evenings and your will to stay awake. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, or not so far, leave a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where this ghostly bedtime journey finds you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive precisely at 7. It's considered impolite to summon the dead before dinner has properly settled. Your boots tap against a floor that creaks with historical enthusiasm. The parlor is dim, not because of atmosphere, but because the gaslight fixture is acting up again. There's always one. You're shown to a round table draped in burgundy velvet. Everything is velvet here. Velvet curtains, velvet cushions, possibly a velvet cat somewhere, if one sits still long enough. Petunia enters wearing a black silk shawl and the expression of someone who hasn't slept since Tuesday. She moves slowly, either for dramatic effect or because the corset was laced by an overly ambitious maid. The séance begins with the standard ritual, dimming the lamps, lighting too many candles, and joining hands. Your palms brush those of two strangers. One smells faintly of peppermint. The other might be asleep already. "Spirits," Petunia intones, "we are ready to receive you." Her voice quivers slightly, not with fear, but possibly from indigestion. You wait. A minute passes, then another. The table does not tip. The candles merely flicker in that drafty way that all Victorian houses seem to do, even when the windows are shut tight and stuffed with last winter's newspapers. Someone coughs. Someone else shifts in their chair. Horace, the resident séance cat, enters dramatically and promptly sits on the guest of honor's lap. A soft thud startles the room. Everyone turns. It's just a biscuit tin falling off a side table. The spirits, it seems, aren't hungry. You lean back. You breathe in the scent of warm wax and carpet that hasn't seen daylight since the Crimean War. Petunia's eyelids flutter. She is either channeling a spirit or deeply contemplating a nap. It's hard to tell. Historians still argue whether most of these early seances were serious spiritual investigations or extremely committed tea parties. The line, like the candle wax down the tablecloth, is a bit blurry. What we do know, by the late 19th century, spiritualism was less a fringe curiosity and more a social hobby. Think bowling night, but with ghost trombones. Real people, earnest people, spent hours, sometimes entire evenings, calling into the void, and mostly hearing furniture settle. One mainstream fact: the first official séance in England took place in the 1850s, after the famous Fox sisters popularized the idea in America. The sisters claimed to speak with the dead, using mysterious knocks and coded tappings. Victorian England, being nothing if not competitive, soon adopted the practice with a proper British twist: more lace, more tea, and less shouting. You examine the table closely now. No trapdoors. No magnets, just a crumb or two from the pre-séance snack plate, ginger biscuits, slightly stale. Petunia lets out a long sigh. "They're being shy tonight," she murmurs. You nod solemnly. The others nod too. No one seems particularly surprised. Ghosts, as it turns out, are unreliable conversationalists. They appear on their own schedule, demand candlelight, and have a tendency to knock things over rather than just say hello. You notice a small book on the mantel. What to expect when you're expecting spirits. The subtitle reads, "A Guide for the Tired and the Willing." Someone drops a teacup. The noise is deafening in the quiet. Everyone jumps, including the cat. Petunia straightens up with sudden inspiration. "I feel a presence." You all sit up. "I believe it's Aunt Marigold." Someone near you gasps. Another whispers, "She was always late." And then nothing. Just the sound of the fire sputtering. The moment passes, but you stay at the table because leaving early from a seance is bad form. Also, someone's borrowed your coat. The seance continues. The same questions are asked. Is anyone there? What message do you bring? Did you move that chair? Or was it the cat? The same answers return. Silence, the occasional thump, and a persistent sense that the room is very warm. The ghost, it seems, is not ready to speak. Or perhaps they're just enjoying the nap too. And that's okay, because in Victorian London, seances were less about clear answers and more about the ritual, the rhythm, the slow unraveling of the evening. And sometimes all you needed was a soft candle, a warm chair, and the hope that the veil might flutter, eventually. You wake the next morning with a stiff neck and the distinct impression that you may have snored in front of a ghost. Petunia assures you it was just the parlor clock chuffing its way through midnight, but Horace the seance cat seems less convinced. Still, you're intrigued. You return the following week, and the week after that. Soon, you're something of a seance regular. You've become familiar with the rituals, the hand-holding protocol. Never grip too tightly, it sends the wrong message to both the living and the dead, and the refreshments. Always ginger biscuits, always lukewarm. But tonight, you're not just attending, you're meeting the mediums. They arrive in a flurry of shawls, crystal pendants, and bags beneath their eyes deep enough to store spare table legs. They're a surprisingly chatty bunch, slipping between deep metaphysical discussions and complaints about corset lacing with seamless ease. You meet a woman named Miss Adelaide Witherspoon. She's in her early 30s, wears 3 rings on each hand for conduction purposes, and claims she once made contact with Julius Caesar, though she admits he only whispered something about boiled cabbage. Adelaide is a professional medium, meaning this is her full-time gig. And business is booming, but not without cost. I haven't slept through the night in years, she sighs, delicately patting her temples with a lavender-scented handkerchief. Spirits don't respect boundaries or time zones. Her laundry list, quite literally, is extensive. On top of her evening seances, she teaches breathing techniques at the ladies' club, writes serialized ghost memoirs for a small pamphlet press, and is halfway through crocheting a full-body spirit net, whatever that is. A fringe tidbit, many Victorian mediums kept detailed dream journals, not for personal reflection, but to cross-reference potential messages from spirits. Adelaide's dream entries include phrases like donkey in a waistcoat and floating potato with mother's voice. Interpretation is ongoing. You're soon introduced to Mr. Percival Triggs, a gentleman medium who looks perpetually startled, possibly due to high levels of residual ectoplasm or just the side effects of drinking 6 cups of coffee before every seance. He conducts most of his spirit work from the safety of his drawing room, surrounded by encyclopedias and one very nervous parakeet. Percival believes ghosts are mostly civil, if a bit passive-aggressive. They knock when they could just speak, he mutters, and they never replace the candles they drain. This week alone, he's held 3 seances, written 2 letters to the editor about faulty planchettes, and suffered 1 mild haunting in his pantry. He believes the sugar spoon is cursed, though historians still argue whether it was just his housekeeper hiding the good silver. You sit beside Percival as he carefully sorts through his seance schedule for the week. He has 2 clients in Chelsea, 1 in Paddington, and a possibly haunted horse in Richmond. You ask him if he ever gets a break. He stares at you blankly for a full 5 seconds, then mutters, Tuesday afternoons, but only if no one's recently perished. It's becoming clear. The average Victorian medium isn't a mysterious robed figure who drifts into parlors like a wisp of fog. They're overworked, under-rested, and slightly overwhelmed by both clients and clairvoyants. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and brief. The mind must remain open in case a spirit decides 3:17 a.m. is the optimal time to complain about their will being misread. And then there's the attire. Corsets, yes. Petticoats, certainly. But also spirit-trapping sashes, ceremonial gloves, and in some circles, anti-ghost bonnets. Not effective, just fashionable. The seance table tonight is surrounded by the usual mix of believers, skeptics, and that one woman who claims her dead husband communicates exclusively through cupboard creaks. Adelaide conducts the session with theatrical flair. Her fingers twitch, her eyes flutter, Her voice drops into a sonorous hum as she recites a poem allegedly dictated by a ghost named Harold, who may or may not have been a postman in life. It rhymes. Mostly. You realize partway through the verse that Adelaide is also mentally composing her grocery list. She admits this to you later. One learns to multitask, she says, yawning into her teacup. Here's the thing they don't tell you about Victorian spiritualism. It's exhausting. Not because of the ghosts, though they can be pushy, but because of the sheer effort required to maintain the illusion. Every gesture, every flicker of candlelight, every properly dramatic sigh, it all takes timing, precision, practice. And the real kicker? Most mediums were women. Mainstream fact, by the 1870s, the majority of spiritualist mediums in Britain were female. It was one of the rare social roles where women could earn money, command rooms, and exercise authority, though always under the unblinking gaze of skeptics, husbands, and occasional bishops. So while men wrote the books and organized the societies, women were out there nightly, channeling pharaohs, calming clients, and trying not to drop the ectoplasm. Percival sneezes mid-session. A candle goes out. Someone gasps. The ghostly atmosphere deflates. That was not spiritual interference, he says quickly. I am simply allergic to horseradish. You nod solemnly. Later, you overhear Adelaide telling a new medium that sleep is optional, but mascara is not. The medium, an eager young woman named Clarissa, nods with wide eyes and slightly trembling hands. And you, tucked quietly into a velvet chair near the window, begin to understand that Victorian ghost hunting wasn't really about proving the afterlife. It was about performance, endurance, and the stubborn hope that if you stayed very still and waited very patiently, someone might reach back. You're beginning to develop a new nighttime routine. Cup of weak tea, 3 sneezes from Percival's mysterious horseradish sensitivity, and the distant sound of someone summoning a duke who's been dead since 1623. You also start noticing a pattern. Mediums are not just tired. They're constantly one missed seance away from a gentle collapse into the nearest fainting couch. You ask Adelaide about it over cucumber sandwiches. She smiles thinly. Dear, she says, I haven't had a full night's rest since the Crystal Palace burned down. She's not alone. All around you, the ghost hunting community is plagued by a shared affliction, spiritual fatigue. You spend one particularly rainy evening with a group called the Society of Nocturnal Investigation. Yes, that's their real name. Huddled in a musty church hall in Southwark. They've brought lanterns, spirit boards, 3 types of biscuits, and enough yawns to keep the room echoing for hours. Mainstream fact, organized ghost hunting societies really did sprout up across Victorian Britain, especially after the 1850s. They often held formal meetings, collected written spirit reports, and debated best practices, while sitting in very cold rooms in very uncomfortable chairs. You join one such investigation. The goal: determine whether a local textile mill is haunted by the former owner, a man known primarily for his enormous mustache and unusually aggressive door-slamming habits. The group arrives just after sunset, armed with notebooks, walking sticks, and an absolutely heroic amount of chamomile lozenges. You follow the lead investigator, Lady Eugenia Rathbone, who wears 7 brooches and insists that ghosts are allergic to citrus. Eugenia insists on beginning every ghost hunt with a reading from her diary. Day 712, she intones solemnly. My left elbow tingled. I suspect spiritual interference also may have been the damp. You explore the mill for hours. Creaking beams, chilly breezes, mysterious shufflings in the shadows, all thoroughly documented. By 2:43 a.m., half the group is asleep, standing up. One man appears to be attempting astral projection through gentle snoring. You check your notebook and find you've accidentally drawn 5 small sheep. It's not that the night was uneventful. It's just that spiritual contact is surprisingly shy. Ghosts, as it turns out, don't follow schedules. They don't RSVP, and they almost never show up during the first hour of a vigil. You return to your lodgings with your boots wet, your spine slightly askew, and a newfound respect for the patience of the Victorian ghost hunting elite. Percival greets you the next day with an extra cup of coffee and a pamphlet titled Exhaustion and the Ether, a guide to avoiding spectral burnout. Fringe tidbit. One popular belief among ghost hunters held that eating too many root vegetables dulled your spiritual sensitivity. Carrots, apparently, were a particular offender. Still, you press on. Curiosity, after all, is a powerful thing. You begin to notice how many mediums and ghost hunters drink tonics. Some homemade. Some sold through mail-order catalogs with names like Dr. Raw, Etherfield's spirit-tapping elixir, or Madame Leclerc's nerve wine for the discerning widow. Historians still argue whether these tonics helped connect people to the spirit world, or just helped them forget what time it was. Adelaide's favorite is a concoction of lavender water, brandy, and just a touch of whatever that green powder is. You don't ask. And yet, there's a dignity in all this sleep-deprived ghost wrangling, a sincerity beneath the theatrics. Even Eugenia's elbow theories come from a real belief in the invisible fabric of things. You sit in on a seance that lasts until nearly dawn. At one point, a message comes through in a scratchy whisper. Cease watering the ferns. No one knows what it means. The only fern in the room is fake. And still, everyone nods, scribbles notes, and whispers, of course. You find yourself wondering about the ghosts themselves. Are they tired too? Do they peer through the veil, see another candlelit circle of yawning Victorians, and think, not tonight, thanks? Your thoughts are interrupted by Adelaide returning from the hallway. She looks stunned. I saw him, she says breathlessly, the ghost of Sir Humphrey Cheeksworth. He was wearing golf trousers. You blink. He's been dead for 84 years, she continues, and still he insists the house smells of onions. You nod solemnly. As she recounts the encounter, her eyelids droop mid-sentence. She stifles a yawn and pats her curls back into place. And you think, maybe the real mystery isn't what happens after death. Maybe it's how these people stay awake long enough to care. You wake up draped awkwardly across a Victorian chaise lounge, one stocking half on, a cup of stone-cold tea balanced precariously on your belly, and a faint echo in your ears. The ferns must suffer. Whether it was a ghost or your subconscious voicing passive aggression about houseplants, you may never know. But this morning brings something different. You've been invited to observe a day in the life of an actual full-time, publicly registered ghost investigator. Her name is Mrs. Tabitha Ferncliff, and she is, as Adelaide puts it, 1 part scientist, 2 parts scandal, and just a dash of peppermint oil. You arrive at her townhouse expecting incense and dime lighting. Instead, you find a bright, cheery parlor full of neatly labeled jars, half-knitted gloves, and a goat named Algernon. Tabitha is not what you'd call traditionally spooky. She wears sensible skirts and has no patience for dramatics. Ghosts, she says, are less about shadows and more about stains that won't wash out and doors that slam slightly too often. She hands you a clipboard. We're off to Clapham, she says briskly. The baker's wife believes her oven is haunted. Mainstream fact. Many Victorian hauntings were reported in ordinary everyday places, bakeries, post offices, even laundries. The popularity of spiritualism brought the supernatural into daily life, often resulting in investigations that blurred the line between ghost story and plumbing issue. Tabitha's toolkit is fascinating. A vial of chalk dust to test for cold spots. A cat whisker she claims detects energy shifts. A crumpet for morale. You carry her bag, which is heavier than expected, mostly due to 6 notebooks, 3 thermoses of tea, and what appears to be a rather determined hedgehog named Sebastian. Spiritual support animal, she explains. The bakery is lovely. The oven is not. It hisses, bangs, and, on occasion, whistles a tune suspiciously like Greensleeves. Tabitha investigates while you politely sample a cruller. She tests the floorboards, interviews the baker's wife, and examines a suspiciously cold spot near the rye bread. Then she stares at the oven, narrows her eyes, and says, You again. Apparently she's met this ghost before. He's named Edgar, and he's particularly upset about burnt scones. Historians still argue whether Edgar was a real man or just a recurring excuse for poor pastry technique. Tabitha mutters. The seance that follows is short and practical. No candles, no chanting, just Tabitha muttering into a biscuit tin and telling Edgar to knock once for yes, twice for please clean the chimney. After 15 minutes and a brief flutter of the flour sack, the haunting is declared resolved. You ask how she knows it worked. Well, she says, brushing flour off her collar, he stopped whistling Greensleeves, didn't he? It's now past noon, and you're wondering if this counts as exercise. Tabitha has 2 more appointments, a haunted hat box and a suspiciously chilly wardrobe in Islington. You tag along, partly out of curiosity, partly because Algernon the goat has taken a liking to your shoelaces. Fringe tidbit: some Victorian ghost investigators swore by animals as spiritual detectors. Cats were most popular, though one gentleman claimed his guinea pig trembled prophetically near haunted fireplaces. As you clatter through London's foggy streets in a rickety carriage, Tabitha unspools the reality of her profession. She works 7 days a week. She gives lectures at the Mechanics Institute every fortnight. She's writing a book titled Spectral Logic for the Sleep-Deprived. And she's tired. So tired. Not just from late nights and creaky stairs, but from the constant pressure to prove the unprovable. It's like fishing, she says, sipping her lukewarm tea. But the fish are invisible, and sometimes the pond gaslights you. By the time you reach Islington, she's nodding off between sentences. You take over note-taking duties, recording one chilly draft, 2 mysterious knockings, and a very judgmental umbrella stand. The wardrobe, as it turns out, is not haunted. It's just built over an air vent. Still, Tabitha thanks the spirits politely, just in case. Later, back at her townhouse, you help her feed Algernon and sort her notebooks by haunting type. Mildly perturbed, unreasonably loud, and polite but persistent. She lets out a sigh so long you swear the curtains flutter. And for a brief moment, you see the ghost hunter not as a fearless investigator, but as someone clinging to mystery, hope, and maybe a bit of spectacle to keep the fatigue at bay. You leave Tabitha's house as the gas lamps flicker on. The streets are misty, your boots are damp, and somewhere you swear you hear a distant, defiant whistle of Greensleeves, off-key but undeniably smug. Tonight, you're going to a haunted castle. Because of course you are. Adelaide arrives at your door wearing what she calls her formal haunting cloak. It has tassels and a small case filled with sugar cubes for emotional stabilization. You suspect most of those cubes will go into her tea. The castle is 2 hours outside London by carriage, and the roads are as muddy and dramatic as a Bronte heroine's diary. By the time you arrive, the moon is bright, the wind is gusting dramatically through the trees, and someone has already fainted. Twice. The location is called Blackwater Keep, which sounds like the sort of place where either a duke was poisoned or a ghost just really doesn't like being disturbed. Possibly both. Mainstream fact: Victorian Britain saw a boom in ghost tourism, where aristocrats and the wealthy middle class would travel to supposedly haunted sites for entertainment. It was part gothic fantasy, part amateur science, and part very soggy weekend. You're here as part of what's generously called a ghostly residency, a 2-night stay with seances, spirit board sessions, and one deeply suspicious ham sandwich. The guest list includes 3 spiritualists, a baronet with a waxed mustache, and a woman who insists she is descended from a long line of banshees. You find your assigned room, turret-facing, faintly mildew-scented, and decorated with a tapestry that seems to be watching you. Adelaide, of course, gets the nice room. She claims it's because she bribed the housekeeper with lemon drops. The evening's first activity is a candlelit tour. Your guide is a man named Mr. Wexley, who wears a velvet coat and walks with a cane he doesn't seem to need. He gestures dramatically toward portraits, tapestries, and a very haunted-looking suit of armor. This belonged to Lord Blackwater himself, Wexley says. He vanished one winter while inspecting the West Tower. Some say he slipped. Others say the whispering stairs got him. Fringe tidbit: several Victorian ghost stories involved haunted staircases that whispered, groaned, or attempted to trip people. Some of these stories were probably started by drafty stonework and very poor footwear. Later that night, you attend a seance in the drawing room. The group forms a circle. Candles flicker. Someone in the corner starts snoring gently, which is honestly fair. A woman named Mrs. Featherstone leads the ritual. Her eyes roll back, her fingers tremble, and she channels, possibly her tax accountant. "I sense a presence," she whispers. They're annoyed about unpaid debts and overcooked cabbage. You suppress a cough and write "angry cabbage ghost" in your notebook. The seance continues for over an hour. At one point, someone's chair tips backward and the baronet yells, "I demand a spectral duel." Adelaide fans herself, sipping her 3rd cup of calming punch, which smells suspiciously like brandy and mint. You're not sure whether any spirits are present, but the overwhelming sensation is drowsiness. Historians still argue whether these lengthy rituals were ever meant to genuinely summon ghosts, or whether they were just dramatic excuses for wealthy Victorians to drink, flirt, and pass out in lace. By midnight, the castle grows colder. You wrap yourself in a borrowed shawl and wander the halls alone, listening for whispers, creaks, moans, anything out of the ordinary. You do hear something. A faint, rhythmic thump-swish, thump-swish. You round a corner, and there it is. The suit of armor, swinging gently in the breeze. Someone's left a window open, and the draft is catching the armor's chainmail just so. It's eerie. It's cold. It's mildly disappointing. You turn to head back and bump directly into Mr. Wexley. "Lovely night for ghosts," he says cheerily, holding what appears to be a very tiny cheese plate. He explains that castle staff often enhance the ambiance by leaving windows open, lighting candles at odd angles, and his words, leaning into the haunting. "It's what the guests want," he shrugs. "A little mystery, a little mildew, a faint sense of being observed by a baron who died of gout." You nod, half asleep on your feet. Even the ghost stories here are tired. You suspect the spirits are just lying low until everyone goes home. Back in your room, the tapestry is still staring. You hang a coat over it. Your bed is lumpy. The wind howls outside. You lie awake, trying to remember whether you locked the door. You didn't. You get up. You do. Then you lie back down, and then, just as you're drifting off, you hear it. A whisper, very faint, just behind your ear. You sit up, heart thudding. "Bring more biscuits." And then nothing. You never find out who said it. Maybe it was the ghost. Maybe it was Adelaide, sleep-talking from the hallway. Either way, you make a mental note to request biscuits at breakfast. And maybe, after all this, you're starting to believe. Not just in ghosts, but in the extraordinary effort it takes to chase them with any level of enthusiasm and an aggressively laced corset. That is, predictably, both overcooked and underwhelming. The eggs look haunted. The toast has clearly seen better centuries. Adelaide, seated across from you, is wearing her third different cloak in 24 hours and enthusiastically buttering a scone that might double as a doorstop. "Well," she says brightly, "did any spirits whisper to you in the night?" You tell her about the mysterious biscuit request. She blinks. "Ah, yes, that was probably me. I've been known to sleep demand carbohydrates." You finish your haunted breakfast and join the rest of the castle's guests for the morning lecture. Manifestations of the Slightly Disgruntled Spirit, 1600 to present. It's delivered by a man with a monocle, which he dramatically removes every time he says the word ectoplasm. The lecture is informative, if slightly unhinged. You learn that most Victorian ghost sightings occurred between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., otherwise known as times you absolutely should be asleep, which makes you wonder how much of ghost hunting was just very fancy insomnia. Mainstream fact: a surge in 19th century sleep disorders, particularly among urban Victorians, coincided with increased reports of nighttime apparitions. Doctors and scientists of the time often debated whether ghosts were genuine phenomena or elaborate hallucinations caused by poor sleep, overwork, or digestion issues. You also learned that an alarming number of spirits reportedly had opinions about curtains. After the lecture, you sneak off for a walk in the castle gardens. It's drizzling, of course. You wander through overgrown hedges and soggy gravel paths, wondering how much of this landscape has remained unchanged since the alleged haunting began. According to lore, Lady Elspeth of Blackwater died tragically during a midsummer ball in 1792. She reportedly haunts the rose arbor, wearing her wedding gown and weeping softly over a broken corsage. The rose arbor is currently home to 3 squirrels, 2 confused pigeons, and what may be a discarded shoe. You wait in silence for a full 20 minutes. No weeping bride appears, but a squirrel does throw an acorn at your boot with what feels like deliberate sass. Back inside, you catch a second ghost lecture, this one on spirit photography. A woman named Dr. Beatrix Lark explains the technical process of double exposure, light leaks, and what she calls the occasional illusion caused by an enthusiastic mustache. She passes around photographs of blurry faces, mysterious streaks, and one particularly persuasive image of a spectral Labrador retriever. Fringe tidbit: spirit photography became wildly popular in the mid-1800s, with many photographers accidentally capturing ghosts in their portraits. Some even had business cards that read, We guarantee a spirit, or the second plate is free. Beatrix admits that most of it is fraud, but she says it with the warmth of someone who still hopes, somewhere, one photo might be real. Historians still argue whether early spirit photography was purely exploitative or if it reflected genuine public attempts to process grief, especially during the height of Victorian mourning culture. After the photo viewing, you retire to the library for tea. It's the only warm room in the castle. The books smell like secrets and mildew. A cat appears. You don't ask where it came from. Adelaide joins you with a teacup the size of her face. "You know," she says, "you'd make a fine medium. You've got the eyebrows for it." You're about to object, but she's already off on a tangent about spiritual eyebrow shapes and the tragic fate of a man named Cedric who channeled Napoleon during a croquet match. Later that evening, it's time for the castle's candlelit spirit walk. Everyone dons cloaks, shawls, and vaguely ominous hats. You're led into the West Wing, the coldest part of the keep, where the walls sweat and the windows rattle without prompting. You pass rooms locked since 1812. One door has a handprint in the dust that no one admits to making. The guide speaks softly, letting silence do most of the storytelling. You reach the old chapel, where Lady Elsbeth's wedding supposedly began and ended in heartbreak. Candles flicker. Something creaks behind you. A curtain stirs. You lean in, only to hear someone sneeze violently and then whisper, "Apologies, it's the draft." It's not a ghost. It's Gerald from Bath. Still, the moment's not entirely ruined. The mood settles again, and for a while, you all stand in silence. It's in that silence that you realize something. These people aren't really here for thrills. They're here for connection. To the past. To the strange. To the stories that linger longer than reason. You don't see a ghost that night, but you do see the value in trying. And in the subtle joy of sharing a warm drink with strangers who also believe, if only a little, that the wind might carry more than air. The next morning, you find yourself staring blankly at a cold kipper and wondering if perhaps ghosts simply avoid castles with bad catering. Adelaide is scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal titled "Spirits and Other Slightly Annoyed Presences." She insists last night's sneeze had otherworldly undertones. You nod politely and focus on your tea. Today's itinerary includes a stop at the British Museum's Spiritualism archives. You're excited, mostly because there will be chairs. The museum's reading room is colder than most walk-in refrigerators and smells faintly of varnish and buried grudges. You're guided by a sleepy intern named Henry, who whispers every sentence like he's trying not to wake an ancient pharaoh. He presents a stack of aging pamphlets with delightful titles like "Seances for the Spirited Widow" and "10 Signs Your Clock is Possessed." Mainstream fact: by the late 1800s, spiritualism had become an organized movement in Britain, complete with its own newspapers, conventions, and even fashion trends. The London Spiritualist Alliance boasted hundreds of members and maintained detailed logs of seances, ghost sightings, and unexplainable toaster incidents. You flip through seance transcripts that are, to be honest, less spooky and more administrative. Spirit of Thomas, present. Complained about the soup. Said floorboards are disrespectful. Another entry simply reads, "Knocking persisted for 11 minutes. Possible rat. We asked. No reply." Your favorite find is a spirit communication log from 1892 in which the ghost of a grocer named Cecil demanded fresher celery and then refused to speak further. Fringe tidbit: some mediums believe ghosts retain their earthly preferences, leading to bizarre demands from the beyond, including tea brewed to specific strengths, chairs moved 2 inches left, and, in one case, a request for pineapple. As you leaf through the pages, Henry quietly shares a story about a retired postmaster who insisted his late wife's spirit haunted the coat rack. Whenever he brought home a new overcoat, she would dislodge it with prejudice. Historians still argue whether these household hauntings were sincere experiences, shared delusions, or simply a polite Victorian way to avoid saying, "You hung that terribly." By mid-afternoon, you and Adelaide are sitting outside the museum with 2 lukewarm sandwiches and a pigeon who appears emotionally invested in your crumbs. Adelaide muses, "Isn't it curious? All these people chasing proof, and yet most of what we find is the attempt itself. The rituals, the records, the disappointment, lovingly archived." You glance at your notes. There are more doodles than data. She continues, I think that's the most human bit of all, believing something might happen and being just prepared enough if it does. You nod, chewing thoughtfully. The pigeon nods too, though it's unclear if it's agreeing or just sizing up your crust. Later, back at your flat, you light a candle, not for ambiance, but because the gaslight is being finicky again. The room glows with soft orange shadows. You sit in your armchair and read through the day's notes, wondering whether ghosts are simply echoes of us, our wants, regrets, unfinished breakfasts. Adelaide sends a telegram. It reads, Tonight, small seance, bring biscuits, no cabbage. Yeah. You sigh, pull on a sweater, and grab a biscuit tin. Some traditions, it seems, are harder to put to rest. The seance is hosted in a small rented room above a tea shop. The wallpaper is faded, and the table wobbles just slightly. There are only 4 of you tonight. You, Adelaide, a librarian named Mavis, and a man called Mr. Crispin, who looks like a coat rack with opinions. You all place your hands gently on the table. Adelaide lights a candle. Mavis closes her eyes. The room is quiet. You listen. To the creak of the floorboards, the soft clink of teacups downstairs, the faint hum of a distant carriage. There's no whisper, no knock, no sudden chill. But the moment holds weight. Not fear, not thrill, just presence. Maybe the ghosts are tired, maybe they're polite, or maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for better biscuits. You pack up, no spirits tonight, unless you count the brandy in Mavis's thermos. Still, as you walk home under gaslamp skies, you realize you're not disappointed. Because maybe the true haunting lies not in the supernatural, but in how persistently human we are in wanting to be remembered, even after we've long stopped making sound. You wake up late the next morning, half draped across your armchair, a biscuit crumbling into your lap like the edible remains of last night's seance. It's quiet, peacefully so. You stretch, brush the crumbs off your sweater, and decide to spend the day exploring one of London's lesser-known relics of spiritualism, the home of Horace Featherstone, a name that sounds suspiciously like a goose in disguise. Horace, once a prominent ghost theorist, now rests comfortably in the annals of fringe belief, having declared that all spirits communicated solely through hat orientation. He kept an entire ledger of tilt angles. His former townhouse has been converted into a peculiar little museum, the Society for the Gentle Study of Unnatural Phenomena. You're welcomed by a man with a beard so wide it might contain its own ghost. He gives you a tour that begins with Victorian divining rods and ends with a painting allegedly done by a spirit using a pencil tied to a mouse. Mainstream fact: in the late 19th century, automatic writing became a popular tool for mediums. They claimed spirits could guide their hands to write messages, sometimes in perfect cursive, occasionally in Latin, and frequently in surprisingly legible complaints about the curtains. One entire wall in the museum is covered in spirit scripts, letters supposedly dictated by ghosts to mediums, all using oddly polite phrasing like, "if I may interject from the afterlife." You pause at a particularly dramatic letter signed by Charles, spirit of an exceedingly tired cobbler, who spends 3 pages discussing his distaste for modern shoelaces. Fringe tidbit: some Victorian seances included guest lectures by the spirits, often on deeply mundane topics. One famous spirit delivered several talks on the proper storage of parsnips in damp cellars. The medium charged extra for root vegetable expertise. You find yourself charmed by how desperately detailed these ghostly correspondences are. You read one where a spirit insists that they once saw Queen Victoria float through the wallpaper like a bored jellyfish. Historians still argue whether these writings were genuine attempts at spiritual contact or clever forgeries designed to entertain, comfort, or simply pass the time in an era with limited evening entertainment options. Before you leave the museum, you stop by the gift shop. It sells the usual magnets, bookmarks, and a tea blend labeled Ethereal Evening. The box claims it's so calming, even the dead rest easier. You buy 2. That night, you invite Adelaide over for tea. She arrives wearing a shawl covered in embroidered ravens and bearing a small tin box. "Spirit mints," she says seriously, "to freshen the afterbreath." You settle in, sipping your ghost-calming tea, and start reading aloud from Horace's journals. He was, to be fair, deeply committed. One entry simply reads, "Spirit appeared, adjusted my cravat, then vanished, possibly judgmental. You and Adelaide laugh, then lapse into a comfortable silence, broken only by the sound of the wind brushing past the window panes. You both know you won't be contacting anyone tonight, and that's okay, because there's something quietly magical in this ritual. The tea, the candles, the pages of bizarre, possibly fictional documentation. You're beginning to suspect that ghost hunting, Victorian style, was less about proof and more about permission. Permission to imagine, to grieve, to connect. You recall a quote from one of the museum's display cards. Whether real or not, the ghosts we chase are often reflections of ourselves, mischievous, restless, and stubbornly in need of attention. Adelaide stretches. Do you think we'll ever see one? A real one? You consider this, then shrug. If we do, they'll probably be as tired as we are. She nods. Good, we'll offer them tea. And you both sit there listening to the nothing which tonight feels full enough. The following week begins not with a ghost, but with an umbrella that turns itself inside out at precisely the same street corner every morning. Coincidence? Maybe. Poltergeist? Doubtful. Mildly annoying? Absolutely. Adelaide calls it evidence of spiritual weather. You're not convinced. Still, you trudge through the rain toward your next haunt, figuratively speaking. Today's destination is a lecture hosted by the London Society for Rational Phantasmology, held in a university hall that smells faintly of chalk and old secrets. The speaker is Dr. Imogen Brackett, a noted historian and unapologetic skeptic. Her topic? Ghosts as Social Theater, Why We Pretend to See What We Wish. She begins with a click of a lantern slide and the image of a mustachioed gentleman peering into a cupboard. This, she intones, was Sir Neville Grimbley. He believed ghosts were trapped in furniture, specifically small drawers. You're hooked. Mainstream fact. Many Victorians didn't just attend seances, they turned their entire homes into paranormal stages. Rooms were darkened, curtains replaced with gauze, bells suspended from strings, and trapdoors cleverly installed under tables. Theatricality wasn't optional, it was essential. Brackett continues, describing mediums who trained in stagecraft, used ventriloquism, or employed spirit trumpets to project ghostly whispers. One particularly enthusiastic couple hired a boy to crawl beneath the floorboards during sessions and tug guest shoelaces at key moments. Fringe tidbit. One ectoplasm expert insisted that true spectral material had a faint lemon scent, and disturbingly, the texture of undercooked meringue. He carried samples in sealed jars. No one asked why. You glance around the audience, a few nod thoughtfully. One man appears to be knitting, another is clearly asleep. You feel a strange camaraderie with them all. Brackett wraps up her talk by proposing that Victorian ghost hunting wasn't about belief or deception, but about community. A shared script, a drama everyone agreed to perform. Historians still argue, she says, whether the Victorians were dupes, dreamers, or just terribly bored, but I think they were mostly just tired, like us. You blink, that line hits home. Later, in the hallway, you find her sipping tea from a chipped mug that says, boo. You compliment her talk. She shrugs. We all chase something. I just prefer mine with footnotes. That evening, you and Adelaide meet again at your favorite haunt. Not haunted, just quiet. A corner cafe that leaves the lights low and the scones warm. She listens as you recount Brackett's theories. A play, she muses. Makes sense. We did have costume changes at that seance in Bath. You sip your tea and smile. I think I was typecast as skeptical witness number 3. She laughs. Better than wobbly table assistant. The truth is, neither of you are entirely sure anymore what you're hoping to find. But you do know this. The hunt has become its own sort of ritual. One that fills your notebooks, fuels your friendship, and adds just enough absurdity to keep the fog of life at bay. Back at your flat, you flip through your notes. Sketches of seance diagrams, a list of spirits, favorite marmalade brands, and a scrawled quote. Some ghosts whisper, others make tea. You chuckle and set the kettle to boil, because even if the spirits remain silent, the tradition lives on. In the talk, the tools, the company, and in the perfectly reasonable suspicion that someone, somewhere, is still hiding behind a curtain, whispering, it's a quiet morning, and the fog has settled in like a lazy cat across the city's shoulders. You wrap a scarf around your neck, mostly out of theatricality, and head out for what might be your most curious appointment yet. You've been invited to visit the archives of the Society for Postmortem Correspondence, an obscure little club once housed in a converted apothecary near Paddington. Their specialty? Cataloging letters to the dead, not from them. Yes, you heard that right. Victorians, it turns out, loved to write to ghosts. Not just famous ones, but their own dearly departed, mothers, husbands, parakeets named Jasper. They composed long, heartfelt notes and posted them to nowhere, or sometimes tucked them into the walls of their homes. The society collected hundreds. You're met at the door by a woman named Mrs. Dalrymple, who looks like she's been pressed gently between the pages of a history book and then reanimated for one final pot of tea. She leads you through a labyrinth of shelves, each labeled with categories like melancholy apologies, questions about socks, and posthumous gossip. Mainstream fact: after the invention of the penny post in 1840, the practice of letter writing exploded. Victorians wrote obsessively, and many extended the habit to the afterlife. It was common for bereaved families to speak to lost loved ones by writing to them regularly, diaries, letters, even telegrams addressed to heaven, C.O. God. Mrs. Dalrymple hands you a sheaf of yellowed pages. The top one reads, "Dear Harold, I hope the soup where you are is less watery than what Margaret insists on making. Also, do you still dislike the neighbor's piano playing? Because she's taken up the flute." You chuckle. Fringe tidbit: one man, known only as DS, wrote 472 letters to his late dog, all detailing his dinner plans and mild grievances with the milkman. He sometimes included doodles of bones and once enclosed a strip of bacon just in case. You find a particularly poetic entry signed Edith, widow of slight patience. If you are still hovering, please knock once for yes, twice for no, and 3 times for put the kettle on. Historians still argue whether these letters were a form of spiritual practice, emotional coping, or simply a way to maintain domestic conversations that grief had inconveniently interrupted. But what's clear is that writing to ghosts was less about waiting for an answer and more about not being ready to stop talking. You're invited to write your own letter, which feels a bit silly at first. But then again, so did the entire concept of ghost mints. You scribble, "Dear whoever's haunting the hallway mirror, if you're going to rearrange the coat hooks, at least pick a symmetrical layout." You seal it and hand it over. Mrs. Dalrymple nods solemnly and files it under domestic correspondence. That night, you share the experience with Adelaide over slices of dubious treacle tart. "Did you write one?" she asks. You nod. "Possibly to a ghost, possibly to my own inner chaos." She raises a spoon in mock toast. "To chaos, and to filing systems." The two of you sit by the window, watching the fog roll in again. It blankets the street in that dreamy, gaslit way that makes everything feel like a memory you never quite had. Somewhere, someone's reading a letter addressed to no one, or everyone, or you. The next morning greets you with the peculiar sound of a harmonium playing itself. At least, that's what your upstairs neighbor insists over toast and marmalade. You're not convinced, but you scribble it down in your notebook anyway. Haunted harmonium, possibly wind-related, definitely off-key. You've begun to notice that life, when viewed through the filter of ghost hunting, becomes oddly musical, half whispers, half performance. Even your dreams hum in minor keys now. Today's plan is something a bit less spectral and a bit more mechanical. You're on your way to visit a private collector of Victorian spiritual detection devices. His flat is somewhere between a museum, a mad scientist's attic, and a glorified cupboard with a tea trolley. The collector's name is Mr. Herbert Withycombe, and he greets you wearing a velvet smoking jacket and a monocle that may or may not actually assist his vision. He shows you the crown jewel of his collection, the spectrophone. It's a device that looks like what might happen if a phonograph mated with a brass squid. Long curling tubes, blinking lights, and a small anxious bell at the top. This, he announces, was meant to detect ghostly harmonics in the ether. Of course, it mostly picks up vibrations from passing carriages and my aunt's cat. You nod respectfully. Mainstream fact: Victorian ghost hunters were fascinated by the intersection of science and the supernatural. They saw electricity, photography, and early sound recording not just as technological marvels, but as potential bridges to the other side. Some believed that spirits communicated via magnetic fields or could imprint their presence on photographic plates. Others wired up entire rooms with telegraphic wires, hoping for a flicker or ping from beyond. Whitcomb demonstrates his most ridiculous invention, the ectobarometer, which allegedly reacts to fluctuations in ghost density. It is, in fact, a repurposed barometer with a sticker reading spooky in copperplate script. He taps it. It does nothing. Quite active today, he says proudly. Fringe tidbit. In 1889, an inventor attempted to sell ghost-proof wallpaper infused with zinc and charcoal, promising it would block unwanted hauntings. It was, coincidentally, also highly flammable. The patent was rejected. You're shown several devices that rattle, squeak, or emit low whistles that make you feel vaguely like you've angered a steam engine. Whitcomb offers you tea, which you accept, despite the cup having a small label that reads, possibly cursed. You sip cautiously. He talks at length about the scientific haunting at a Brighton fishmonger's in 1874, during which every haddock in the shop allegedly turned to face east. The significance, he says, is still being debated. Historians still argue whether these early devices were honest efforts, elaborate pranks, or a kind of Victorian performance art. But it's clear that for every charlatan selling ectoplasmic socks, there were genuine minds, curious, eager, and yes, just a little bored, trying to map the unknown with wires and willpower. As you're leaving, Whitcomb hands you a small metal disc. Spirit compass, he whispers. Always spins when near unresolved emotions. It's a coin glued to a washer, but you thank him earnestly and pocket it. You'll give it to Adelaide as a souvenir. She'll probably hang it from her umbrella just to irritate the skeptics. Outside, the city feels soft and humming, like it's exhaling after a good ghost story. You walk slowly, umbrella in one hand, notebook in the other. The ghosts can wait. They're very good at that. Of rain tapping gently at the window pane. London seems to be whispering today, its streets damp and gleaming, its chimneys exhaling thin plumes of ghostly smoke into the gray sky. Today's destination is not a museum, nor a seance, nor a laboratory wired with copper tubing. No, today you are visiting the unlikeliest hub of Victorian ghost culture, the tea room of Mrs. Sybil Gudgeon. She's 92, wears 8 brooches at once, and believes every good haunting can be solved with scones. You ring her bell at precisely 2 o'clock, because to be early would be rude, and to be late would result in being turned into a footstool. Her words, not yours. She ushers you inside, past a ticking grandfather clock and a taxidermy owl named Bertrand. You're not entirely sure if Bertrand is merely decorative or an exorcist's apprentice, but he's got a suspicious glint in his glassy eye. The tea is hot, the scones crumbly, and Mrs. Gudgeon is already mid-sentence before you've even sat down. Oh yes, she says, the ghosts these days are terribly well behaved, ever since I installed the lemon candles. You pause mid-sip. Lemon? They hate citrus, everyone knows that. Mainstream fact, many Victorians believed in domestic hauntings, not grand old castles, but the very ordinary spaces, kitchens, bedrooms, parlors. The idea that ghosts lingered in the folds of daily life was far more unsettling and fascinating. Entire books were written about household spirits, and spiritualists began marketing cleanses for your home's etheric vibrations. Some even suggested arranging furniture in triangle patterns to encourage spectral flow. Mrs. Gudgeon shows you her ghost shelf. It contains one cracked teacup that spontaneously rattles on Tuesdays, a mirror that once fogged up with the word boo, and a porcelain duck that fell off the mantelpiece in '58 for no reason except dramatic effect. You admire her cataloging system, Post-its, and a strict rotation schedule. Fringe tidbit. In 1891, an ad appeared in the Times offering haunting services for rent. For a small fee, an actor dressed in pale linens would lurk in a client's home to impress guests or frighten superstitious in-laws. The business folded after one ghost was accidentally invited to supper. Mrs. Gudgeon recalls her childhood, when her grandmother would knock 3 times on the pantry door before entering, just in case Grandpapa's ghost was reorganizing the pickles. Never interrupt a spectral man in brine, she adds solemnly. The conversation drifts to old neighbors, one who swore her front garden was cursed because her begonias only bloomed in hexagonal clusters, and another who believed ghosts ironed her curtains while she was out. Nice pleats, Mrs. Gudgeon says, raising her eyebrows meaningfully. Suspiciously nice. Historians still argue whether these everyday ghost stories were sincere beliefs, social bonding rituals, or a kind of Victorian therapy. spirituality folded into routine like sugar into tea. Either way, these small, peculiar hauntings gave people a sense of narrative, of something more just around the corner, or perhaps in the pantry. You glance around the room. There's a small draft behind your chair. The curtains flutter even though the window is firmly shut. Mrs. Gudgeon sees you noticing. "Oh, don't mind that. It's just Maurice. He only turns up when the biscuits are stale." She leans in. "He's a bit judgy, honestly." You thank her for the tea, the scones, the paranormal hospitality. She wraps a warm scone in a napkin and insists you take it for the ghost in your coat pocket. You're not sure if she's joking. Back out on the wet street, the city feels more alive somehow. Its ghosts less frightening, more nosy and fond of jam. You wonder how many old houses carry stories like Mrs. Gudgeon's, layered like wallpaper, fading but never fully peeled away. Somewhere nearby, a kettle whistles. A curtain stirs. The past, as always, is making itself quietly at home. Rain again, but the soft kind, more like a fog that drips. Your umbrella keeps most of it at bay, though it does little to shield your shoes from the splashy puddles that ambush you from the cobblestones. By now, you've given up trying to stay dry. You march onward like a slightly damp scholar of the supernatural. Today's stop, the archives. Not the official government kind. The private, winding, half-mildewed sort tucked behind a bookshop and guarded by a man named Felix, who smells like old paper and once tried to file a banshee under B for beverage screaming. Felix greets you with a sigh of recognition and a pot of oversteeped tea. He knows why you're here, and he's already pulled several boxes labeled Ghost Hunters, Fatigued. They're heavier than expected. The ghost of Arm Day lingers. As you settle in at a dusty wooden desk under flickering gaslight, or perhaps just a low-wattage electric bulb doing its best Victorian cosplay, you begin leafing through yellowing letters, diary entries, and official minutes from the Society for Psychical Research. Mainstream fact: founded in 1882, the Society for Psychical Research brought a measure of academic legitimacy to ghost hunting. It attracted scientists, philosophers, and even famous authors like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. They conducted case studies, hosted public investigations, and published detailed reports with an air of scholarly seriousness that only occasionally unraveled when the table floated mid-meeting. One letter catches your eye. It's from a Mrs. Evangeline Partridge, dated 1894, who writes, "Dearest Charlotte, I regret to inform you that our séance last Tuesday was interrupted most rudely by a sneeze from the beyond. It echoed most dreadfully. Mr. Partridge has since moved into the garden shed, claiming spiritual allergies." You smile, then blink. There's a pressed lavender sprig still in the envelope. It smells faintly of dust and perfume, a delicate ghost of its own. Fringe tidbit: in 1897, a team of London ghost researchers developed a sleep schedule designed to maximize haunting detection during REM cycles. It involved warm milk, isolation, a rotating shift of candle watchers, and, inexplicably, pickled onions. The trial lasted 3 nights. All participants reported visions, one reported indigestion. The deeper you dig, the more you notice a curious pattern. The ghost hunters, these allegedly fearless seekers of the ethereal, were exhausted. Their journals are littered with mentions of headaches, aching feet, faulty lanterns, and missed meals. One man simply wrote, "Saw nothing. Ate crackers. Cold again. Why do I do this?" Historians still argue whether this weariness stemmed from physical overexertion, spiritual frustration, or sheer existential dread. One theory suggests that the ritual of ghost hunting itself, its endless waiting, silence, and darkness, created a kind of meditative fatigue. Another posits that these folks were just very bad at time management. You flip through a ledger where a famed medium tallied seances like chess matches, including win-loss ratios and degree of spiritual sass. You pause at a tiny pencil note. 2:13 a.m., slight rustling. Could be ghost, could be raccoon, London unclear. And then, 4:44 a.m., poltergeist or wind, polterwind. It's all so human, this desperate desire to believe, this equally desperate suspicion that nothing's really there. And the way it all so often ends in yawning. You take a moment to rest your head on your arm. The tea has gone cold. The archives hum softly with the warmth of too many stories and not enough ventilation. And then, somewhere behind you, a book slides off a shelf. Naturally. You wait a moment, then sigh, stand, and return it to its spot. It's titled How to Listen for Ghosts Without Losing Your Mind. A charming lie that. You close your notebook for the day and thank Felix, who offers you a sandwich from 1986. You politely decline. He shrugs and eats it himself. Back on the street, the city feels thick with stories. The ghosts in the pages have bled out into the air, and everything seems expectant, as if the next haunting might be yours, but only if you stay awake long enough to catch it. Which, let's be honest, you probably won't. By now, you've been poking around the shadowy corners of Victorian ghost hunting for so long, your coat smells permanently of must and matches. Your boots squeak in apology with each step, and your hat, if you're wearing one, has acquired a somewhat haunted tilt. Today, you've come to observe the last and most mysterious frontier of 19th century spectral exploration, the dream seance. Not a regular seance. Oh no, this one's performed entirely while asleep. You arrive at a private manor in Hampstead, where the ivy has been trying to reclaim the brick since 1834. The host, Lady Honoria Plimblewick, greets you at the door with a yawn and a teacup that says simply, "I talk to dead people." She's been conducting these dream seances for over a decade, which she says has made her an expert in both the paranormal and the perfect mattress firmness. You're led into a darkened drawing room. The curtains are drawn, the candles flickering. 7 guests lie tucked under floral quilts on antique chaise lounges. One man is already snoring. Another whispers, "I hope my ghost isn't chatty." Lady Plimblewick offers you a sleeping cordial, which smells like lavender, regret, and maybe a hint of sherry. You decline. Someone has to stay conscious to take notes, after all. Mainstream fact, as psychology began to bloom in the late 1800s, the Victorians grew fascinated by dreams, not just as symbols of the subconscious, but as portals to the beyond. Some mediums claimed that the barrier between the living and dead was thinnest during REM sleep. Thus, the dream seance became a genuine practice among certain spiritualist circles, complete with pre-sleep rituals and shared post-nap debriefings. Fringe tidbit: one London circle developed a spectral alarm clock, a pendulum weighted with mothballs, rigged to swing over a sleeper's head and drop a penny precisely when the medium claimed a ghost would arrive in the dream. Results were mixed. One participant reported only dreaming about buying stamps. The seance begins. Lady Plimblewick dims the lanterns and begins reading from the collected whisperings of the afterlife in a voice so smooth it might as well be upholstered. You're pretty sure you catch a line that goes, "May your sleep be undisturbed by banshees with boundary issues." Soon, soft snores fill the room, and then something even stranger, murmurs. One sleeper, Mr. Fortescue, distinguished by his monocle, which is still inexplicably in place, begins to mutter, "The tower? The windmill? Julia, don't open the door." You scribble madly. Then Miss Ada, age 22 and draped like a sentimental novel, stirs and giggles in her sleep. He keeps his head in the pie safe. It's unsettling. It's oddly poetic. It's entirely unhelpful in locating ghosts. When the seance ends, naturally with a biscuit, you gather for the debrief. Lady Plimblewick tallies everyone's dreams on a chalkboard labeled Spectral Accuracy Index. Mr. Fortescue earns a 7/10. Ada, a 4. Pie imagery is unconfirmed. One woman dreams of an empty room and is awarded a perfect 10. Minimalist haunting. Plimblewick nods. Very chic. Historians still argue whether these dream seances were sincere spiritual exercises or performative sleep therapy. Some believe participants may have been channeling subconscious hopes, fears, and suppressed memories. Others say it was simply an excuse to nap in public and call it culture. You ask whether anyone's ever truly seen something in these dreams. Lady Plimblewick considers this. One time, she says, a gentleman from Yorkshire woke up shrieking, "The bishop's tap shoes." We never invited him back. You thank her for the dream-adjacent hospitality and step back into the waking world, blinking against the morning sun. Birds chirp, a milk cart rattles past, nothing ghostly, nothing dramatic, just the quiet exhale of a city that never stops sleeping. The dream seance, for all its frills and flourishes, left you with one undeniable impression. Most ghosts, if they exist at all, are less inclined to appear in flashes of light or shrieking wails, and more likely to drift through our minds while we snooze, wrapped in strange symbols and softened memories. You walk away, thinking perhaps the afterlife isn't always theatrical. Maybe sometimes it's just a whisper between dreams. The final stretch. Your coat is heavier now, filled with rain, secrets, and biscuit crumbs from at least 3 seances. The lamplighters are out again, their flames flickering like polite ghosts that don't want to interrupt your thoughts. And you, resolute amateur of the arcane, slightly sleep-deprived documentarian of the deceased, are heading for your last destination, the train station. No, really. You've heard whispers, pun absolutely intended, that some of the most exhausted Victorian ghost hunters weren't scouring graveyards or sitting cross-legged in basements. They were simply waiting, on platforms, for phantoms with nowhere else to go. Tonight, you're at the now-abandoned platform of an old London terminus, once the launchpad for excursions to haunted manors and fog-draped coastal inns. You sit on a bench where thousands once fidgeted and sighed and clutched their valises full of curiosity and peppermint lozenges. Here's the thing. Victorians love trains, and they love ghosts. So naturally, they invented the idea of ghost trains. Mainstream fact, in the late 19th century, the term ghost train wasn't metaphorical. People believed that certain trains, especially those transporting the dead, could become spiritually charged. The most famous was the London Necropolis Railway, which carried coffins from the city to Brookwood Cemetery. It ran a special line with first-class compartments for the deceased and their mourners. Yes, you could buy your dearly departed a more expensive ticket. Victorian capitalism was nothing if not thorough. Fringe tidbit, a forgotten side society, the Phantom Commuter Club, claimed to hold silent vigils on empty train platforms, watching for spectral arrivals. They dressed in black, wore gloves, always gloves, and once attempted to install a conductor's whistle that only ghosts could hear. It worked exactly as well as you'd expect. Tonight, you watch. Nothing comes. Unless you count a distant squeak that could be a squirrel or the great-great-grandson of a pickpocket. But waiting is kind of the point, isn't it? You think of everything you've seen. Not floating candelabras or moaning apparitions, no, but something subtler. A long, weary trail of people who devoted their evenings and early mornings, their aching backs and fogged-up spectacles, to the impossible task of proving there's something after this. Something more. They didn't find much. Not evidence, anyway. But they found each other. Through societies and clubs, through shared potluck seances and dream-logging journals, through cold tea and colder rooms, they built a community of hopeful skeptics and skeptical hopers. People so exhausted, they accidentally invented the modern nap. Historians still argue whether Victorian ghost hunters were charlatans, believers, or clever performance artists. But you, after all this wandering, start to suspect the truth is even softer. They were tired. Tired of logic. Tired of mourning. Tired of a world that demanded everything be explained. So they turned their lanterns toward the dark, not because they knew what was there, but because they hoped something was. You stand from the bench, stretch your spine until it pops. Yes, you're that invested, and begin the quiet walk home. One gas lamp flickers. You pause. Was that a breeze? No, just your imagination. Probably. Your journey ends not with answers, but with a full notebook and a strange sense of peace. You've joined a long line of those who've peered into the shadows and emerged not terrified, but a little more curious, a little more dreamy, a little more sleep-ready. And now, softly, slowly, we wind things down. Final 300 words. Let the footsteps fade now. Let the gaslights dim behind your eyes. You've wandered long enough tonight. The benches of forgotten stations, the velvet parlors of seance hosts, the paper trails of dreams and longing, they're folding away like stage sets tucked gently behind a velvet curtain. You no longer need to chase echoes. You can simply listen to the quiet ones inside you. Let your breathing match the rhythm of some slow, distant train. Not urgent, not haunted, just steady. The Victorians, bless them, tried so hard to make sense of what they couldn't see, and in doing so, they taught us something without meaning to. That belief doesn't always need proof. Sometimes it just needs rest. So give yourself that tonight. Sink back. Let your arms grow heavier. Let your thoughts drift like fog over the Thames, soft and slow and free of direction. You don't need to hold on to anything now. Not even questions. If a ghost comes, it won't knock. It'll whisper or not. Either way, you'll be too far gone in dreams to notice. Sleep well, weary hunter. You've earned it. End of script. Sweet dreams.